Okay, so the first step is to create one of the wings, and they're going to be created through the use of the letter B. And you can select a suitable typeface at the start, but the handy thing about After Effects is that even when you finish this complex animation, you can always go back in and double click to change the font at any stage that you want after you've created the animation. I'm going to stick with something pretty basic and straightforward. I'm going to go with Helvetica, if I have it. Yes, it is set to Helvetica. Now the next step is to put the anchor point somewhere that it's going to make sense for the flapping of the butterfly. Now it would actually make sense for me to leave the anchor point here, but just for visual clarity, what I like to do is to move the anchor point up to the center of the bee and position it somewhere in the middle there. Now, not just for reasons of clarity, there is actually a reason coming down the line that we will need the anchor point also to be positioned there. So I'm going to move that to slightly off the left edge of the B, and I'm going to start animating this. Before I do, I need to turn it into a 3D layer, and I need to get myself two views so that I can have the active camera view, and I can also have a view that's going to allow me to see the rendered version, or sorry, to allow me to look along one of the edges of the bee so that I can actually animate it and see the result at the same time. So on the left hand side here, I'm going to set this to top view, which allows me to look straight down along the bee. So I'll select it and hit R to bring up my rotation property. Now you'll see that if I want this to flap along the straight edge of the bee here, it's going to have to rotate around the Y-axis. So I can put a keyframe on the Y, and I can rotate using the rotation tool, or the shortcut is W, and rotate that either on the left or the right here. I'm going to do it in my orthogonal view so that it starts there. Oop, beg your pardon. Actually, I'm going to have it start here, and then I'm going to move the playhead out and have it flap up. Now, why didn't that give me a keyframe? Okay, we'll try that again. Now, here's the reason. I have it set to orientation up here at the top. I need to set that to rotation because I'm modifying the rotation property and not the orientation, which I didn't actually have keyframed. So now when I adjust the Y, it will add a keyframe. So now I've got one flapping movement. So from here on in, it's just a case really of copying and pasting and then modifying the keyframes. Okay, so this will give me a kind of a fairly steady, if somewhat slow, flapping movement. Select all my keyframes, hold down Alt, pull those back to about 5 seconds, and you'll see them start to flap there. I'll just do a quick RAM preview. And perhaps there isn't enough of a flap there, so I'm going to go back and change that. A bit more exaggerated, as is what I normally want when I'm doing an animation. Now, okay, so there's a little bit more dynamic looking flap. Now, what I also like to do when I'm creating this animation is to give the downward flap, make it a little bit faster and then a little bit slower on the upwards part of that flapping movement, just to give the impression that it's kind of forcing the air out from underneath the wings. So to do that, I'll just select every odd keyframe and pull it a little bit closer. And that should make it faster on the down and then slower on the up. Just very slightly. Okay, so that's not looking too bad, so I'll just duplicate that another few times. And pull the work area out. Now, the other way that I want to change the nature of this flapping movement is to make it a little bit smoother so that it actually looks like it's more of a natural, organic kind of movement. And the quickest and easiest and best way to do that in this case is to select all of my keyframes, right click, and set them all to easy ease so that they ease in and out of the flapping movement. Okay, so it's still just rendering away there, that's why it's going at some odd speeds. Okay, so that's looking pretty smooth, it's got the right kind of movement. So what I can do now is I can take this as kind of the base animation for the flapping wings, and I can create another wing basically replicating that movement but mirroring it on the other side of the butterfly. Now to do that, I just duplicate the layer and open up the rotation transform properties. Now you'll see that because it's the same layer effectively, it's moving in exactly the same way in the same place, so it's not really going to be of much use to me. Now there's a few different ways that you can go about making the second flapping wing. You could animate it separately. You could just animate this using different properties on the other side and try and make it match up as best you could. There's a very nice kind of shortcut way of doing this though, and it's not very obvious, and if I'm honest, I found it through trial and error, not so much through design. But if you flip the wing exactly minus 180 degrees on the X and the Z axes, not the Y, and because these X and Z rotation properties are not keyframed, then they're just going to flip it and leave it in that position. Now what you'll notice when you set it to minus 180 on each one of these axes, it mirrors the flapping movement. Okay, now it's slightly askew there, so it's not exactly where I'd want it to be, but that's okay, I can fix that in a moment. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to parent these two flapping wings to a null object. And what I can do at this stage is I can name these, actually I'll call them left wing and right wing. Now I'll create a null object, and I need to turn this into a 3D null object as well if I wanted to kind of do anything meaningful in 3D space. And I'm going to zoom in on this particular view, and I'm going to reposition the null object so that its anchor point pretty much sits in the middle of those two wings. I'll select left and right wing, parent them to null 2, and now just to straighten up the wings I'm going to rotate the null. No. Oh, I'm on the wrong one, excuse me. That's the one I should have been rotating. Okay. Yeah. So you can see now it's doing its thing there. Okay, so the wings now are kind of flapping as I would expect them to. Now I'm going to just get rid of this view on the left so I have more space to look at the active camera on the right. I'll switch to one view. Now I have my null object. I have my two wings parented to the null object, and the next thing that I need to do now is to just rotate the B so that it kind of is a little bit more kind of flying towards and away from me, and I'll do that by rotating the null object in world axis mode, and that means rotating it on the X Okay, so you can see now that I've rotated the null and it's taken the two wing layers with it. Okay, so I can leave this where it is for the moment, and I can then create my cameras. Now, I have an active camera. That's kind of an implied camera that the composition, a 3D composition, needs for the animation to be rendered, to be visualized. But if I want to add cameras to set up separate views, then I just right click, new camera, and if you've been playing with cameras already and you want to kind of set it back to a default camera, then you want to go into the preset and go from custom to generally 50. 50 will give you a nice kind of midway lens that won't be terribly wide or terribly long. It'll just give you that kind of default 50mm lens angle, which is what the active camera effectively uses, and that camera can then be modified to basically do whatever you need it to do. So I'm going to open up the camera's transform properties, and in this case what I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe the position, and actually I'll keyframe it out here at about 2 or 3 seconds. Now I'll go back to the first one, and I'm going to get one of my camera tools. I'm going to get the unified camera tool, and I'm going to rotate or move the camera around to that point, and that would get me a certain kind of movement. We'll use it. So what this is doing is it's kind of rotating around to the back of the camera. Now if I wanted to, what I could do is I could bring in a new camera, and we'll leave that at 50mm as well, and I'm going to bring this in just after that camera has done its move, except this camera is going to be looking at it from a much wider angle, so I'll use I'll just keyframe them all for the moment, get my unified camera, get my orbit camera control. In fact, and I get my track Z to pull it back, so I'm getting a much wider shot now. So you can see that this one kind of rotates around to the back, then we cut to a real wide angle, and then what we can do is we can just split the layer and delete the tail end here, so that we go back to our shot where the camera is at the back, and from here on we can actually animate the null to make it look like the butterfly is flying away from us. So I'll pull up my position property, keyframe it, get the selection tool, and I want to push this away in its local axis. So I'll start pushing it away. If you want to push it faster, hold down Shift and it will allow you to do it that way. So if I pull up my two views, push the second one to left, I should be able to see the null object's motion path, and if I wanted to, then I can play around with how that moves, how it travels away from the camera. I can add some curvature to the movement as well, and it should fly away in a kind of an arc. Okay, so the last thing I might want to do is to set some motion blur to make it look like it's kind of flying away out of focus. I'll bring back my one view active camera, and I'll find the camera that's actually looking at it right now, double click it to open it up, or if I wanted to I could open up its camera options down here, find the properties that affect the depth of field. So first of all, it's switched on. It's usually switched on by default. I can bump the aperture up You can see it's starting to soften, and I can bring the blur level up as well. You'll see that it kind of goes out of focus there. Close my camera options, and you'll see that when it starts to fly away, it also starts to go out of focus. Now if I wanted to, I could change its change the transparency of the butterfly as it left as well, if I wanted to push that even further. So if it also, or if each wing, actually I can use the null, if the wings want to fade down into transparent, then I can get my null, open up the opacity, keyframe it. No, I mightn't be able to do this on the null actually. I'll do it on the wings. So they're set to 100 here, and then as it goes further away, I can set that to 0. So they kind of fly off into the ether. Do a quick RAM preview. Well, I say quick. It's up to the computer how quick the RAM preview is going to be, but you get an idea of what's going on. So you can fall back on your knowledge of cinematography for how you want to set the cameras up. You can do a simple kind of wide shot, mid shot, close up, follow shot, whatever it is you need to do. You have the theoretical tools. You just need to be able to implement those moves and those angles with the cameras in After Effects, and you'll get the same effects.